Trucker Sam Stitch Lawson had driven the highways of America for over 20 years. His nickname came from the patchwork of scars crisscrossing his arms and torso, souvenirs from a life spent hauling freight through all kinds of weather and all manner of danger. Despite the scars, he loved the open road, the solitude, and the freedom it provided. However, he had never felt more isolated than he did on the night of October 30th, as he barreled down the seemingly endless stretch of Route 54 in the desolate heart of Kansas. The night was moonless, the sky a thick, velvety black that swallowed the headlights of his big rig. His only companion was the steady hum of the engine and the crackling voices on the CB radio, exchanging ghost stories to pass the time. Stitch listened with half an ear, more focused on the road ahead and the storm that was beginning to brew on the horizon. He had a delivery to make by dawn, and he couldn't afford any delays. As he drove, Stitch's thoughts drifted to his wife, Maggie, and their 2 kids back home in Oklahoma. He missed them terribly, especially on nights like this, when the road seemed to stretch on forever and the loneliness was almost tangible. He reached over and turned up the volume on the radio, hoping the chatter would keep him awake. "You ever heard of the Highwayman?" A voice crackled through the static, catching Stitch's attention. "Yeah, some say he haunts these parts," another voice replied. "A ghostly figure, doomed to wander the highways for all eternity, seeking revenge on the truckers who wronged him." Stitch chuckled to himself. Truckers were a superstitious lot, always swapping tales of haunted highways and vengeful spirits. He didn't believe in ghosts, but he appreciated the distraction. "Well, I'm not afraid of no ghost," Stitch muttered, shifting in his seat. "Let's see what you got, Highwayman." The first sign of trouble came just after midnight. Stitch was approaching a small, run-down gas station when he saw a figure standing by the side of the road, thumb outstretched. Hitchhikers were a common sight, but something about this one made Stitch hesitate. The man was tall and gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to pierce the darkness. His clothes were tattered, hanging off his skeletal frame like rags. Against his better judgment, Stitch slowed the rig and pulled over. The stranger approached, and as he drew closer, Stitch felt a chill run down his spine. The man's eyes were black as coal, and his skin was pale and translucent, almost ghostly. "Need a ride?" Stitch called out, trying to keep his voice steady. The stranger nodded slowly. "Thank you, sir. I've been walking for miles." Stitch opened the passenger door, and the man climbed in, settling into the seat with a sigh of relief. As they pulled back onto the highway, Stitch couldn't shake the feeling that he had made a terrible mistake. "Where are you headed?" Stitch asked, trying to make conversation. The stranger turned to him, a faint smile playing on his lips. "I'm looking for someone. A man who wronged me a long time ago." Stitch's grip tightened on the wheel. "Well, I hope you find him. What's your name, anyway?" "Call me Jack," the stranger replied. Jack Holloway. The name sent a shiver down Stitch's spine. He had heard stories about a man named Jack Holloway, a trucker who had died in a fiery crash on this very stretch of road years ago. They said his ghost still roamed the highways, seeking vengeance on those who had betrayed him. Stitch forced a laugh. "Well, Jack, it's a long way to the next town. You might as well get comfortable." The storm hit with a vengeance, the wind howling like a pack of wolves and the rain lashing against the windshield. Stitch squinted through the deluge, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. Jack sat silently beside him, staring out into the darkness with those unsettling black eyes. The radio crackled with static, the voices drowned out by the storm. Stitch reached over to adjust the dial when he heard a whisper, faint and barely audible. "He's here." Stitch glanced at Jack, but the stranger hadn't moved. He shook his head, chalking it up to the wind. But the whisper came again, louder this time. "He's here, the Highwayman." Stitch's heart pounded in his chest. He had driven these roads for years, and he had never been scared. But now, with Jack's eerie presence and the storm raging outside, he felt a growing sense of dread. Suddenly, the rig shuddered, and the headlights flickered. Stitch cursed under his breath, gripping the wheel tighter. The road ahead seemed to blur, the rain turning into a swirling mist that obscured his vision. And then he saw him, a figure standing in the middle of the road, dressed in black. with a wide-brimmed hat that cast a shadow over his face. Stitch slammed on the brakes, the rig skidding on the wet pavement. The figure didn't move, didn't flinch as the truck barreled towards him. Stitch closed his eyes, bracing for impact. But when he opened them, the road was empty. The figure had vanished. He turned to Jack, but the passenger seat was empty. The door hung open, rain pouring in. Stitch's breath came in ragged gasps as he tried to make sense of what had just happened. Stitch pulled over to the side of the road, his hands shaking. He reached for the radio, hoping to find some comfort in the familiar voices of his fellow truckers. "Breaker, breaker, this is Stitch. Anybody out there?" The radio crackled, then a voice responded. "This is Big Red. What's up, Stitch?" Stitch took a deep breath. "I think I just saw the highwayman." There was a pause, then Big Red's voice came back, laced with concern. "You been hitting the bottle, Stitch? Ain't no such thing as the highwayman." "I swear, I saw him," Stitch insisted. "And the hitchhiker I picked up, he disappeared." "Maybe you need some rest," Big Red suggested. "Pull over and get some shut-eye. You're probably just tired." Stitch nodded, even though he knew Big Red couldn't see him. "Yeah, maybe you're right." He drove a few more miles until he found a rest stop. The storm had eased up, but the wind still howled through the trees, creating an eerie symphony. Stitch parked the rig and climbed into the sleeper cab, locking the doors behind him. He lay down, but sleep wouldn't come. His mind raced with images of the ghostly figure and the haunting eyes of Jack Holloway. He felt a presence in the cab, a cold breath on the back of his neck. "He's here." Stitch sat up, his heart pounding. The whisper was real, and it was coming from inside the cab. He turned on the light, but there was no one there. "Get a grip, Stitch," he muttered to himself. "It's just your imagination." But deep down, he knew it was more than that. The highwayman was real, and he was coming for him. The rest of the night passed in a blur of fitful sleep and waking nightmares. Stitch awoke to the first light of dawn, the sky a murky gray. He climbed back into the driver's seat, his body aching with fatigue. He started the engine and pulled back onto the highway, determined to make his delivery on time. But as he drove, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. Every shadow seemed to conceal a lurking figure. Every gust of wind carried a whisper of his name. "Stitch." He tried to ignore it, focusing on the road ahead. But the whispers grew louder, more insistent. The highwayman was close, and he wasn't alone. Stitch glanced in the rearview mirror and saw a convoy of trucks behind him, their headlights piercing the morning fog. At first, he thought they were just fellow truckers, but then he noticed something strange. The trucks were identical, their drivers shadowy figures with hollow eyes. Panic surged through him. He floored the accelerator, the rig roaring down the highway. The convoy followed, matching his speed, their engines a deafening roar. "Leave me alone," Stitch shouted, gripping the wheel with sweaty hands. The whispers turned into a cacophony of voices, echoing inside his head. "He's here. The highwayman. You can't escape." Stitch's mind raced. He had to find a way to shake the convoy, to escape the highwayman's wrath. He spotted a narrow side road up ahead and swerved onto it, the rig fishtailing on the gravel. The convoy followed, relentless in their pursuit. Stitch pushed the rig to its limits, the trees whipping past in a blur. He could feel the highwayman's presence, a cold shadow that clung to him. Up ahead, the road split into two. Without thinking, Stitch took the left fork, the rig bouncing over the rough terrain. The convoy veered right, disappearing into the forest. Stitch let out a sigh of relief, but it was short-lived. The road ended abruptly at the edge of a cliff, the ground dropping away into a deep ravine. He slammed on the brakes, the rig skidding to a halt just inches from the edge. He sat there, panting, his heart pounding in his chest. He had escaped the convoy, but he was far from safe. The highwayman was still out there, waiting for his moment to strike. Stitch knew he couldn't stay at the edge of the cliff forever. He had to find a way to end this nightmare, to confront the highwayman and put an end to his haunting. He turned the rig around and drove back to the main road, his mind racing with plans and possibilities. As he drove, the whispers returned, growing louder with each passing mile. "He's here, the highwayman." Stitch tightened his grip on the wheel. Show yourself, damn it. I'm not afraid of you. The road ahead shimmered, the air growing thick with fog. Stitch squinted, trying to see through the haze. And then he saw him, standing in the middle of the road, the highwayman. Stitch slammed on the brakes, the rig screeching to a halt. He climbed out of the cab, his heart pounding in his chest. The highwayman stood motionless, his wide-brimmed hat casting a shadow over his face. "Why are you haunting me?" Stitch demanded, his voice trembling. The highwayman raised his head, revealing hollow eyes that seemed to burn with an unearthly light. "You wronged me, Sam Lawson. You and your kind. You left me to die on this forsaken road." Stitch shook his head. "I don't even know you." "You knew me once," the highwayman replied. "I was Jack Holloway, a trucker like you. I trusted you, and you betrayed me." Stitch's mind raced, trying to remember. And then it hit him. Years ago, he had been part of a convoy that had left a fellow trucker behind, stranded with a broken-down rig. They had been in a hurry, desperate to make their delivery on time. "I didn't know," Stitch whispered. "I didn't know you died." The highwayman took a step closer, his eyes burning with fury. "You left me to die, and now you will pay the price." Stitch backed away, his heart pounding. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Please, let me go." The highwayman raised his hand, and the wind howled through the trees, a deafening roar. "Your apologies mean nothing. Your fate is sealed." Stitch ran back to the rig, his mind racing with fear. He climbed into the cab and slammed the door, locking it behind him. The highwayman stood outside, his eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. The rig shuddered, the engine roaring to life. Stitch floored the accelerator, the truck lurching forward. But the highwayman didn't move, didn't flinch as the truck bore down on him. Stitch closed his eyes, bracing for impact. But when he opened them, the highwayman was gone. The road ahead was empty, the fog lifting to reveal a clear path. He drove for hours, the whispers fading into silence. The sun rose, casting a golden light over the landscape. Stitch felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe he had escaped the highwayman's wrath. But as he rounded a bend in the road, he saw a familiar figure standing by the side of the highway. Jack Holloway, with his hollow eyes and tattered clothes. Stitch's heart sank. He hadn't escaped. The highwayman was still with him, still haunting him. He pulled over, his hands shaking. Jack approached, a faint smile on his lips. "You can't outrun your past, Sam," Jack said. "You can't escape your fate." Stitch nodded, his heart heavy. "I know. I'm sorry for what I did. I wish I could make it right." Jack's smile faded. "It's too late for that. But maybe you can find some peace if you face your demons." Stitch took a deep breath. "How do I do that?" "By remembering," Jack replied. "By facing the truth of what happened." Stitch nodded, his mind filling with memories of that fateful night. The convoy, the broken-down rig, the desperate hurry to make their delivery, and the man they had left behind, stranded and alone. "I'm sorry," Stitch whispered. "I'm so sorry." Jack's eyes softened, the anger fading. "I know, and maybe that's enough." The fog lifted, the sun shining bright. Stitch felt a weight lift from his shoulders, a sense of peace he hadn't felt in years. He climbed back into the rig, his heart lighter. The road ahead was long, but he was ready to face it. As he drove, he glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Jack standing by the side of the road, a faint smile on his lips. Stitch smiled back, knowing that he had finally found a way to make peace with his past. And as the miles rolled by, the whispers faded into silence, leaving only the hum of the engine and the open road ahead. The phantom of Black Hollow. For Trucker Jake Iron Willis, the highways of the Midwest were his second home. He knew every curve, every mile marker, and every hidden rest stop. But the night of November 13th was different. Jake had been on a long haul from Chicago to Denver, his rig loaded with electronics. The weather had been fine, but as he approached the small town of Black Hollow, the sky darkened and a thick fog rolled in, obscuring the road ahead. Jake's CB radio crackled to life with warnings from fellow truckers. "Avoid Black Hollow," a gruff voice advised. "Bad things happen there, especially on nights like this." Jake scoffed. He wasn't one to believe in ghost stories or urban legends. He adjusted his cap and continued down Route 82, ignoring the uneasy feeling that settled in his gut. The road ahead split into two, with a detour sign pointing towards Black Hollow. Jake glanced at his map and saw that the detour would shave off an hour from his route. He decided to take it, confident that he could handle whatever came his way. As he drove into Black Hollow, the fog thickened, swallowing the rig in a dense, swirling mist. The headlights barely penetrated the gloom, casting eerie shadows on the trees that lined the road. Jake turned on his high beams, but they only seemed to make the fog denser. "Just keep driving," he muttered to himself. "It's just a shortcut." Black Hollow was a ghost town, its streets deserted and its buildings crumbling. Jake drove slowly, his eyes scanning the road for any sign of life. The fog clung to everything, creating an oppressive atmosphere that made his skin crawl. He passed an old gas station, its windows shattered and its pumps rusted. A flickering neon sign hung above the entrance, casting an eerie glow on the surroundings. Jake felt a shiver run down his spine. He had never seen a place so desolate. As he continued through the town, he saw a figure standing by the side of the road. A woman, dressed in a tattered white dress, her long hair hanging in wet strands around her face. She raised a hand, signaling for him to stop. Against his better judgment, Jake pulled over. The woman approached, her movements slow and deliberate. She looked up at him, her eyes hollow and filled with sorrow. "Can you help me?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jake nodded, unable to find his voice. He opened the passenger door, and the woman climbed in, her presence sending a chill through the cab. "What's your name?" Jake asked, trying to break the silence. "Emily," she replied, staring straight ahead. "I need to get out of here." Jake nodded and started the engine. "Where are you headed?" "Anywhere but here," Emily said, her voice trembling. "Just drive." As Jake drove, the fog grew thicker and the air grew colder. He glanced at Emily, who sat silently beside him, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. There was something unsettling about her, something that made him feel like he was being watched. The CB radio crackled to life, and a voice filled the cab. "Iron, you need to get out of Black Hollow. Now." Jake's heart skipped a beat. "Who is this?" "Just get out before it's too late," the voice urged. Jake glanced at Emily, who remained silent. He pressed down on the accelerator, the rig lurching forward. The road twisted and turned, the fog making it nearly impossible to see. Suddenly, the radio crackled again, and the same voice spoke. "He's coming for you. The Phantom." Jake's blood ran cold. He had heard stories of the Phantom of Black Hollow, a vengeful spirit said to haunt the town and its surrounding roads. The legend spoke of a trucker who had been murdered years ago, his spirit doomed to wander the highways, seeking revenge on those who dared to enter his territory. Jake shook his head. "This is crazy. It's just a story." But deep down, he felt the fear creeping in. The fog seemed to close in around him, and the air grew colder still. He glanced in the rearview mirror and saw a pair of headlights in the distance, drawing closer with alarming speed. "He's here," Emily whispered, her voice trembling. "The Phantom." Jake floored the accelerator, the rig roaring down the road. The headlights behind him grew brighter, closer. He could feel the presence of something malevolent, something that wanted him dead. The road ahead split again, and Jake took the right fork, hoping to lose the Phantom in the winding turns. The headlights followed, relentless in their pursuit. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he navigated the treacherous curves of the road. The Phantom's truck loomed closer, its headlights casting an eerie glow on the fog. Emily sat silently beside him, her eyes wide with fear. "Why is he after us?" Jake shouted over the roar of the engine. Emily's voice was barely audible. "He's trapped here, seeking vengeance. He doesn't want anyone to leave Black Hollow." Jake tightened his grip on the wheel. "Well, we're getting out of here." The road twisted and turned, the fog growing thicker with each passing mile. The Phantom's truck was right on their tail, its horn blaring a deafening sound that echoed through the night. Jake's mind raced. He had to find a way to lose the Phantom, to escape his vengeful grasp. Up ahead, he saw a narrow dirt road veering off to the left. Without thinking, he swerved onto it, the rig bouncing over the rough terrain. The Phantom followed, his truck barreling down the narrow road with terrifying speed. Jake pushed the rig to its limits, the trees whipping past in a blur. He could feel the Phantom's presence, a cold, malevolent force that seemed to seep into his very soul. Suddenly, the road ended at a dilapidated bridge, its wooden planks creaking under the weight of the rig. Jake didn't slow down, hoping the bridge would hold. The Phantom's truck was right behind them, its headlights blinding in the darkness. As they crossed the bridge, Jake felt a jolt and the rig shuddered. He glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the Phantom's truck stalled at the edge of the bridge, its engine roaring in fury. Jake floored the accelerator, the rig speeding away from the bridge. The fog began to lift, the road ahead becoming clearer. He could see the lights of a town in the distance, a beacon of hope in the darkness. Jake and Emily reached the edge of Black Hollow just as dawn was breaking. The fog dissipated, revealing the desolate landscape of the cursed town. Jake pulled over, his hands shaking with exhaustion and fear. Emily turned to him, her eyes filled with gratitude. "Thank you. You saved me." Jake shook his head. "We're not out of this yet. The Phantom is still out there." Emily nodded, her expression somber. "I know, but you gave us a chance." Jake glanced in the rearview mirror and saw the Phantom's truck in the distance, its headlights growing dimmer as it remained trapped at the edge of the bridge. He knew they had to act fast before the vengeful spirit found a way to cross. "We need to destroy that bridge," Jake said, determination in his voice. "It's the only way to keep him from following us." Emily nodded. "There's an old gas station back in town. We can get some supplies there." Jake started the engine, and they drove back into Black Hollow. The town was eerily silent, the buildings casting long shadows in the early morning light. They reached the gas station and found a stash of old dynamite in the back room. Jake loaded the dynamite into the rig and drove back to the bridge. The Phantom's truck remained stalled at the edge, its headlights flickering like the eyes of a trapped beast. Jake and Emily set the charges, working quickly and efficiently. As they finished, Jake looked at Emily, a mixture of fear and resolve in his eyes. "Let's end this." They retreated to a safe distance, and Jake pressed the detonator. The explosion rocked the ground, and the bridge collapsed in a shower of splintered wood and dust. The Phantom's truck disappeared into the ravine, its horn blaring one final, mournful note. The sun rose over Black Hollow, casting a golden light over the town. Jake and Emily stood at the edge of the ravine, staring at the wreckage of the bridge. The Phantom was gone, his vengeful spirit finally laid to rest. Jake turned to Emily. "What will you do now?" Emily smiled faintly. "I think I'll leave this place, find a new life somewhere far away from here." Jake nodded. "Good idea. I think I'll do the same." They walked back to the rig, the weight of the night lifting from their shoulders. As they drove away from Black Hollow, Jake glanced in the rearview mirror one last time. The town was fading into the distance, a ghostly reminder of the horrors they had faced. "Thank you, Jake," Emily said softly. "For everything." Jake smiled. "Just glad we made it out alive." As they drove towards the rising sun, the fog lifted completely, revealing a clear road ahead. The whispers of the Phantom faded into silence, leaving only the hum of the engine and the promise of a new beginning. The haunted highways of Black Hollow were behind them, but the memories would linger, a reminder of the night they faced the Phantom and lived to tell the tale.